Hans Michael Frank was a German lawyer who worked for the Nazi Party during the 1920s and 1930s, and later became Hitler's personal lawyer. After Hitler's ascension to power in 1933, Frank became Nazi Germany's chief jurist and Governor-General of occupied Poland's general government territory. During his tenure throughout World War II, he instituted a reign of terror against the civilian population, systematic plunder and brutal economic exploitation, and became directly involved in the mass murder of Polish citizens. At the Nuremberg trials, he was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and was executed. Pre-war career: Frank was born in Karlsruhe to Karl Frank, a lawyer, and his wife, Magdalena. He had an older brother, Karl Jr., and a younger sister, Elizabeth. He joined the German army in 1917, during World War I. After the war he served in the Freikorps under Franz Ritter von Epp's command, and then joined the German Workers' Party, in 1919. He was one of the party's earliest members. Frank studied law and rose to become Adolf Hitler's personal legal advisor. As the Nazis rose to power, Frank also served as the party's lawyer. He represented it in over 2,400 cases and spent over $10,000. This sometimes brought him into conflict with other lawyers. One, a former teacher, appealed to him, "I beg you to leave these people alone. No good will come of it. Political movements that begin in the criminal courts will end in the criminal courts." In September–October 1930, Frank served as the defense lawyer at the court-martial in Leipzig of Lieutenants Richard Scheringer, Hans Friedrich Wendt and Hans Ludin. 3 Reichswehr officers charged with membership in the NSDAP. The trial was a media sensation. Hitler himself testified and the defense successfully put the Weimar Republic itself on trial. Many army officers developed a sympathetic view of the National Socialist movement as a consequence. Frank was elected to the Reichstag in 1930, and in 1933 he was made Minister of Justice for Bavaria. From 1933, he was also the head of the National Socialist Jurists Association and president of the Academy of German Law. Frank objected to extrajudicial killings as it weakened the power of the legal system, both at the Dachau concentration camp and during the Night of the Long Knives. Frank's view of what the judicial process required should not be exaggerated. From 1934, Frank was Reich Minister without portfolio. Wartime career. In September 1939 Frank was assigned as Chief of Administration to Gerd von Rundstedt in the German military administration in occupied Poland. From October 26, 1939, following the end of the invasion of Poland, Frank was assigned Governor-General of the occupied Polish territories, controlling the general government, the area of Poland not directly incorporated into Germany. He was also granted the SS rank of Obergruppenführer 1/4 Rehr. Frank oversaw the segregation of the Jews into ghettos, especially the enormous Warsaw Ghetto, and the use of Polish civilians as forced labor. In 1942 he lost his positions of authority outside the general government after annoying Hitler with a series of speeches in Berlin, Vienna, Heidelberg, and Munich, and also as part of a power struggle with Friedrich Wilhelm Krah 1/4 Gehr, the State Secretary for Security, head of the SS and the police in the general government. Krah 1/4 Gehr himself was ultimately replaced with Wilhelm Kopp. On December 16, 1941, Frank spelt out to his senior officials the approaching annihilation of the Jews. A great Jewish migration will begin in any case. But what should we do with the Jews? Do you think they will be settled in Ostland, in villages? We were told in Berlin, why all this bother? We can do nothing with them either in Ostland or in the Reichskommissariat. So liquidate them yourselves. Gentlemen, I must ask you to rid yourself of all feelings of pity. We must annihilate the Jews wherever we find them and whenever it is possible. When this was read to him at the Nuremberg trials he said, "One has to take the diary as a whole. You cannot go through 43 volumes and pick out single sentences and separate them from their context. I would like to say here that I do not want to argue or quibble about individual phrases. It was a wild and stormy period filled with terrible passions, and when a whole country is on fire and a life and death struggle is going on, such words may easily be used. Some of the words are terrible. I myself must admit that I was shocked at many of the words which I had used. An assassination attempt by Polish secret state on 29/January 30, 1944 in Sarakubow near Krakow failed. A special train with Frank traveling to Lviv was derailed after an explosive device discharged, but no one was killed. Death camps. The general government was the location of 4 of the 6 extermination camps, namely, Bielsk, Treblinka, Majdanek and Sobibor. Chelmno and Birkenau fell just outside the borders of the general government. Frank later claimed that the extermination of Jews was entirely controlled by Heinrich Himmler and the SS and that he, Frank, was unaware of the extermination camps in the general government until early in 1944, a surprising claim and one found to be untrue by the Nuremberg tribunal. During his testimony at Nuremberg, Frank claimed he submitted resignation requests to Hitler on 14 occasions, but Hitler would not allow him to resign. Frank fled the general government in January 1945 as the Soviet army advanced. Chess. Hans Frank took an avid interest in chess. He was a good player, and possessed an extensive library of chess literature. He received the Ukrainian chess grandmaster Efim Bogoljubo at Wall Castle. Frank was a patron of general government chess tournaments. On November 3, 1940 he organized a chess congress in Krakow. 6 months later he announced the establishment of a chess school under Bogoljubo and the world chess champion, Dr. Alexander Alekhine, and he visited a chess tournament in October 1942 at the Literary Café Copyright in Krakow. Capture and trial. Frank was captured by American troops on May 3, 1945, at Tegernsee in southern Bavaria. He was manhandled and beaten, walking the gauntlet of American soldiers, and because of that, he tried to cut his own throat. 2 days later, he lacerated his left arm while attempting to slit his wrists in a second unsuccessful suicide attempt. He was indicted for war crimes and tried before the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg from November 20, 1945 to October 1, 1946. During the trial he renewed, guided by Fr. Sixtus O'Connor OFM, the faith of his childhood, Roman Catholicism, and claimed to have had a series of religious experiences. Frank voluntarily surrendered 43 volumes of his personal diaries to the Allies, which were then used against him as evidence of his guilt. Frank confessed to some of the charges and expressed remorse on the witness stand, showing penitence for his crimes. On the witness stand, he said, after having heard the testimony of the witness Rudolf H. Paragraph SS, "My conscience does not allow me to throw the responsibility solely on these minor people. I myself have never installed an extermination camp for Jews, or promoted the existence of such camps. But if Adolf Hitler personally has laid that dreadful responsibility on his people, then it is mine too, for we have fought against Jewry for years. And we have indulged in the most horrible utterances." He and Albert Speer were allegedly the only defendants to show remorse for their war crimes. At the same time he accused the Allies, especially the Soviets, of their own wartime atrocities. The former Governor-General of Poland was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity on October 1, 1946, and was sentenced to death by hanging. Frank viewed his sentence as a form of atonement for his sins. The death sentence was carried out on October 16 by Master Sergeant John C. Woods. Journalist Joseph Kingsbury Smith wrote of the execution. He answered to his name quietly, and when asked for any last statement, he replied, "I am thankful for the kind treatment during my captivity and I ask God to accept me with mercy." Memoirs. While awaiting execution, he wrote his memoirs. In the capacity as his attorney, Frank was privy to personal details of Hitler's life. In his memoirs, written shortly before his execution, Frank made the sensational claim that Hitler had commissioned him to investigate Hitler's family in 1930 after a blackmail letter had been received from Hitler's nephew, William Patrick Hitler, who allegedly threatened to reveal embarrassing facts about his uncle's ancestry. Frank said that the investigation uncovered evidence that Maria Schicke-Gruber, Hitler's paternal grandmother, had been working as a cook in the household of a Jewish man named Leopold Frankenberger before she gave birth to Hitler's father, Alois, out of wedlock. Frank claimed that he had obtained from a relative of Hitler's by marriage a collection of letters between Maria Schickergruber and a member of the Frankenberger family that discussed a stipend for her after she left the family's employ. According to Frank, Hitler told him that the letters did not prove that the Frankenberger son was his grandfather but rather his grandmother had merely extorted money from Frankenberger by threatening to claim his paternity of her illegitimate child. Frank accepted this explanation, but added that it was still just possible that Hitler had some Jewish ancestry. But he thought it unlikely because, from his entire demeanor, the fact that Adolf Hitler had no Jewish blood coursing through his veins seems so clearly evident that nothing more need be said on this. Given that all Jews had been expelled from the province of Styria in the 15th century and were not allowed to return until the 1860s, scholars such as Ian Kershaw and Brigitte Hamann dismiss as baseless the Frankenberger hypothesis, which before had only Frank's speculation to support it. There is no evidence outside of Frank's statements for the existence of a Leopold Frankenberger living in Graz in the 1830s, and Frank's story is notably inaccurate on several points such as the claim that Maria Schickergruber came from Leonding near Linz, when in fact she came from the hamlet of Strans near the village of Dar Paragraph-Lischem. Some suggest that Frank made the claim that Hitler had Jewish ancestry as way of proving that Hitler was really a Jew, and not an Aryan. And in this way, proved that the Third Reich's crimes were the work of the Jewish Hitler. The full anti-Semitic implications of Frank's story were borne out in a letter entitled "Was Hitler a Jew?", written to the editor of a Saudi newspaper in 1982 by a German man living in Saudi Arabia. The writer accepted Frank's story as the truth, and added since Hitler was a Jew, the Jews should pay Germans reparations for the war, because one of theirs caused the destruction of Germany. But American author Ron Rosenbaum suggested another reason for Frank's story. On the other hand, a different version of Frank emerges in the brilliantly vicious, utterly unforgiving portrait of him by his son, Nicholas Frank, who depicts his father as a craven coward and weakling, but one not without a kind of animal cunning, an instinct for lying, insinuation, self-aggrandizement. For this Hans Frank, disgraced and facing death on the gallows for following Hitler, fabricating such a story might be a cunning way of ensuring his place in history as the one man who gave the world the hidden key to the mystery of Hitler's psyche. While at the same time, revenging himself on his former master for having led him to this end by foisting a sordid and humiliating explanation of Hitler on him for all posterity. In any case, it was one Frank knew the victors would find seductive. Family. On April 2, 1925, Frank married 29-year-old secretary Brigitte Herbst from Forst. The wedding took place in Munich and the couple honeymooned in Venetia. Hans and Brigitte Frank had 5 children: Sigrid Frank, Norman Frank, Brigitte Frank, Michael Frank, Nicholas Frank. Brigitte Frank had a reputation for having a more dominant personality than her husband. After 1939 she called herself a Queen of Poland. The marriage was unhappy and became colder from year to year. When Frank sought a divorce in 1942, Brigitte gave everything to save their marriage in order to remain the First Lady in the general government. One of her most famous comments was, "I'd rather be widowed than divorced from a Reichsminister." Frank answered, "So you are my deadly enemy." In 1987, Nicholas Frank wrote a book about his father, Der Vater, eine Berechnung, which was published in English in 1991 as In the Shadow of the Reich. The book, which was serialized in the magazine Stern, caused controversy in Germany because of the scathing way in which the younger Frank depicted his father. Nicholas referred to him as a slimehole of a Hitler fanatic, and questioned his remorse before his execution. Nicholas is the sole living child of Hans and Brigitte Frank. Sigrid remained a committed Nazi who emigrated to South Africa during the apartheid regime and died there. Brigitte committed suicide in 1981. Michael and Norman died in 1990 and 2010, respectively. In literature, Curzio Malaparte, an Italian writer who during the war also served as a reservist Italian army officer, and unofficial diplomat because of his ties with Germany, wrote extensively in his 1944 opus Caput on Frank and the convivial dinners the governor held in his mansions outside Warsaw and Krakow for Malaparte and other guests. He also mentions that Frank was a capable piano player. Quotations: in a 1940 interview in the Var paragraph Lancashire Beobachter, portrayal in the media, Hans Frank has been portrayed by the following actors in film, television and theatre productions. Hans Schwarz Jr. in the 1954 West German film Geld aus der Luft, Lufthaarbelag, and the 1968 East German television miniseries Wieger one Quarterbers Land. Boja Mirik in the 1971 Yugoslavian television production Nineberski Epilogue, Jerzy Dostoevsky in the 1976 Polish film Okalia Miasto, John Bailey in the 1978 United States television production Holocaust, Robert Austin in the 1984 United States television production Pope John Paul II, Frank Moore in the 2000 Canadian U.S. TV production Nuremberg, Matt Craven in the 2005 Polish television production Carol, Un uomo diventato papa, Andreas Conrad in the 2005 German TV miniseries Spear Under. Harold Posch in the 2005 Italian-Polish television production Pope John Paul II, Will Keane in the 2011 BBC production The Man Who Crossed Hitler. See also, German war crimes, Glossary of Nazi Germany, List of Nazi Party leaders and officials, The Holocaust in Poland, Command Responsibility, References. External links, Testimony of Frank at Nuremberg.